Have you ever wondered what it's like to grow up with a bond so strong, yet so different, that the world around you doesn't quite understand it? Lucas and Samuel have known that feeling their whole lives. Growing up in an orphanage on the outskirts of town, these two brothers, one white and one black, faced rejection from families who couldn't see beyond their appearances. But their connection, their love for each other, has kept them going through the harshest of times. What happens when they finally uncover the truth behind their abandonment? Stay tuned, because the revelations are just around the corner. Lucas and Samuel had lived their entire lives in that gloomy orphanage on the outskirts of the city. From a young age, they knew there was something about them that caused discomfort. Lucas, with his fair skin and blonde hair, and Samuel, with his dark complexion and deep eyes, seemed to fit in nowhere with the families that visited in search of children. To many, they were a living contradiction, a bond that was not understood and not accepted. As children, they became accustomed to the furtive glances and whispers of the adults who came to the orphanage with hope of adopting. At first, Lucas always smiled, full of hope, believing that one day a family would see beyond their appearances. But Samuel, from a young age, had learned to detect rejection long before it arrived. He could read the expressions of the couples who entered the adoption room, interested at first, only to look away upon seeing them both. "So it's not going to happen, Lucas," Samuel would say quietly, time and again. They would sit on the benches in the visiting room, waiting for adults to finish evaluating each child as if they were merchandise in a showcase. "What's not going to happen?" Lucas would reply with his usual cheerful tone, even though his voice trembled slightly. He knew exactly what his brother meant, but his optimism refused to be easily defeated. Us, being adopted, together. Never. That last word hung in the air, raw and painful. Lucas looked away, his light eyes filling with sadness, but Samuel was no longer looking at him. He had grown accustomed to shielding himself from pain before it arrived. He knew that was the only way to survive in a place where hope was a cruel joke. The orphanage was not a kind place, not only because of the indifference of the adults, but also because of the other children. The teasing began as soon as the others noticed that Lucas and Samuel were brothers. At first, the other orphans didn't understand how someone so different could be linked by blood, and that incomprehension soon turned into cruelty. "Look, the white one and the black one," shouted one of the older boys, provoking laughter from the others as they ran around the yard. "What are you? Did they adopt one by mistake?" The others would mock, and Lucas would try to defend himself, but Samuel always stopped him. "Let it go. It's not worth it," Samuel would say firmly, watching as the others walked away, leaving them with the hurtful words still echoing in their heads. That was the dynamic they had learned to cope with. While Lucas tried to find a ray of hope each day, Samuel built walls around himself. It wasn't that he didn't want a family, but after so many failed attempts, so many looks of disappointment, he decided he couldn't allow himself to dream of something that probably would never come. Sometimes, at night, when the orphanage was quiet, Lucas would look out the window, imagining what it would be like to live in a home of their own, with parents who loved them regardless of their differences. But Samuel, always the more practical one, had found refuge in technology. They soon discovered that both shared an interest in the digital world. The nights spent in the small computer room of the orphanage became their moments of peace, where racism and rejection didn't exist, only logic and creativity. "Check this out," Lucas said one day while they were working on a project they found online about programming. "If we learn enough, we could do anything. Maybe even create something that gets us out of here." Samuel smiled, not because he believed technology would free them from the orphanage, but because he knew that in those moments, when they were in front of the screen, they could forget the cruel world around them. However, those calm nights were always interrupted by reality. Morning brought with it the same cycle: adults who glanced at them sideways, children who bullied them, and the constant feeling that they didn't belong anywhere. Every time a couple came to the orphanage looking for children, Lucas would grip Samuel's hands tightly, as if that could keep them together, as if it could be enough to change the inevitable. But it wasn't. One afternoon, after another family passed them by, Lucas could no longer contain himself. "Why?" he asked. his voice breaking. "Why do they always look at us like we're a mistake?" Samuel didn't answer immediately. He looked at his younger brother, feeling the anguish radiating from him, but also the frustration building inside himself. Finally, in a low voice, he replied, "Because to them, we are. We're something they don't understand, something they don't want." Lucas looked away, fighting back tears. The weight of his brother's words crushed him, yet he couldn't accept it. He refused to believe that this was all the world had to offer them. Samuel, on the other hand, had accepted it long ago. The days in the orphanage continued to be grey, interrupted only by the nights when the two brothers, self-taught and eager for knowledge, immersed themselves in their digital world, a temporary escape from a reality that didn't accept them. While Lucas continued to dream of a family, Samuel prepared for a life where perhaps they would never be accepted. One morning, when they woke up, Samuel looked at Lucas, who still clung to hope. He knew him too well not to realize that his optimism was wearing thin. And although Samuel didn't want to admit it, he feared the day his brother would stop dreaming, because he knew that without those dreams, the only thing left for them would be the cold, emptiness and darkness of the orphanage that had marked them so deeply. The twins. Fate seemed sealed, but Samuel had yet to uncover everything about their origins. Neither of them had. They didn't know that the answers to their questions, the ones that kept them prisoners of rejection, were much closer than they imagined. But for now, rejection remained their only reality. On the day they turned 18, Lucas and Samuel woke up to the same routine as always. The orphanage, which had been their home for so long, now felt emptier, colder. The younger children still ran through the hallways, but the twins knew their time there had come to an end. The feeling was strange, a mix of relief and fear of the unknown. They had spent years waiting for this moment, but now that it was upon them, the uncertainty weighed heavier than ever. Mr. MacArthur, the orphanage director, called them to his office at the end of the day. Despite his reputation for being a stern man, his eyes showed a strange mix of compassion and responsibility. There was something in his expression that unsettled Samuel, who, as always, Cowes was the more cautious of the two. "Today is your 18th birthday," MacArthur said, his voice raspy from years of sneaking cigarettes. "You've been a couple of tough kids, I admit, but today I must fulfill a promise." MacArthur stood up from his chair and, after a brief hesitation, approached a dusty shelf where a small wooden box was stored. It was small, with worn edges, but it seemed to carry an immense weight. "Your mother left this here for you the day you arrived." His words hung in the air for a moment. Lucas and Samuel exchanged silent glances. "The condition was that it would only be given to you when you turned 18. MacArthur extended the box to them and then sat back down, crossing his arms as if his part in this was over. Lucas was the first to take it. His hands trembled slightly. Samuel, however, remained still, staring at the box as if it were a dangerous object, as if what lay inside could change everything. "What do you think is in there?" Lucas asked, his voice filled with hope. Samuel shrugged. He didn't know, and at that moment, he wished he didn't have to know. The fear of the unknown, of the answers that might hurt more than help, was too strong. Lucas tried to open it immediately, but the box was secured with a small, rusty padlock. MacArthur handed them a tiny, rusted key without saying another word, and nodded his farewell. They walked back to the small room they had shared their entire lives in the orphanage. Neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with tension. Lucas couldn't wait to open the box. To him, that little box represented hope, the possibility of answers. Who was their mother? Why had she left them? Maybe there was an explanation, a reason that could bring them some peace. Samuel, on the other hand, felt the exact opposite. His instinct told him that some things were better left buried. He had lived his whole life knowing they didn't fit in, that they were different. Discovering the truth about their mother, about their origins, could only deepen the pain they had already endured. "I'm going to open it," Lucas said, determined. "Wait," Samuel interrupted, stepping in front of his brother. "What if what we find isn't what we expect?" Lucas looked at him, bewildered. "We can't live with questions forever, Sam. We're adults now. We have the right to know." Samuel lowered his gaze. He knew Lucas was right, but the fear was paralyzing. What if the truth brought more pain? With trembling hands, Lucas inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The click of the lock opening echoed in the room, and both held their breath as he lifted the lid of the box. Inside, they found a series of old documents and a letter, written in a handwriting they didn't recognize. The letter was addressed to both of them. "Dear Lucas and Samuel, if you are reading this, it means you are now adults. I'm sorry. I can't say it any other way. I'm sorry for not being there, for not being what you needed. I know you must have many questions, Banwawan, but the truth is I was also a victim of decisions I couldn't control. It was never my intention to leave you alone, but there were forces greater than me." The twins read the words in silence. Lucas felt his heart race. To him, these lines were a ray of light, a promise that there was still more to discover. But Samuel felt an even deeper weight in his chest. "There's an address," Lucas said excitedly, pointing to one of the papers. The last known sighting of her was in this city. It was an address in a distant metropolis, a city they had never heard of before, but the idea that their mother might be there, or at least that they could find out something about her, sparked a fire in Lucas. "We have to go," he said with conviction. "What if we don't like what we find?" Samuel replied, his voice filled with doubt. "What if this breaks us more than we already are?" Lucas stared at him intensely. He knew his brother had always been more cynical, more reserved, but in that moment, he couldn't understand how he could want to remain in ignorance. "Would you rather never know?" Lucas shot back, nearly furious. "Would you rather live with these questions forever? I can't." The silence between them was heavy. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't want to go, didn't want to face a truth that could be worse than the abandonment they had already suffered. But Lucas was his brother, and he knew he wouldn't let him go alone. He couldn't. "Fine, we'll go," Samuel finally conceded, his voice subdued. The journey to the city was long. They each carried only a small backpack with the little they had accumulated during their years in the orphanage. The metropolis was everything they knew it would be. Noisy, impersonal, and with a constant flow of people who didn't stop to look at two lost young men. Every corner of the city seemed to have its own secrets, and the cold wind cutting through the streets only intensified their sense of being uprooted. When they finally arrived at the address listed in the documents, they found an old, worn-out building, as if time and indifference had forgotten it. When they inquired at the reception about their mother, they were met with cold stares and vague responses. It was as if, once again, they had become just another story of abandoned children, an echo no one wanted to hear. Lucas felt frustrated, but he didn't want to give up. Samuel, however, was already starting to think that this was a mistake. They had hoped for answers, but found only indifference and closed doors. The place was merely a postal address where, for a small fee, people could send and receive mail. In every silence they received, Samuel felt his fears becoming more real. Maybe there were things they shouldn't discover. But despite everything, they both knew they couldn't stop now. Not after coming this far. The city was never kind. Lucas and Samuel quickly found that out upon their arrival. The constant noise of the metropolis, the chaos of the avenues, the endless lights of the skyscrapers, everything was different from the orphanage. There was no place they could call home, no one willing to lend them a hand. They were two strangers in a crowd that kept moving without a glance. They had spent their meager savings on a tiny, dingy room in an old building, a sort of temporary refuge that smelled of dampness and mold. Each day was a struggle to survive. Samuel, always the more cautious one, saved every coin, knowing they couldn't afford luxuries. Lucas, on the other hand, was eager to find a way to move forward, to keep searching for their mother. However, they could not ignore the reality. They needed money to survive, and the only resource they had was their skills with technology. Since childhood, they had spent hours in front of the orphanage computers, teaching themselves. Now, in the solitude of their small room, those skills became their only opportunity. "We could do something useful with this," Lucas suggested one night, while they worked on an old laptop they had bought cheaply. "What do you have in mind?" Samuel asked, always skeptical. Lucas looked up. His mind hadn't stopped working since they arrived in the city. The idea had been growing inside him since they received the box at the orphanage. A facial recognition software, he said determinedly. Something that can help track down missing people. Samuel stared at him, surprised. He knew Lucas was desperate to find their mother, but that idea, it was more ambitious than he had ever imagined. That sounds complicated. We don't have the resources, the time, and certainly not the money. Lucas didn't give up. I know it's difficult, but it's not impossible. We know how to do this, Sam. We've learned enough. If we manage to create something functional, we could use it to find Mom, and who knows, maybe help others too. Silence filled the room for a few seconds. Samuel couldn't ignore the passion in his brother's voice, but he knew the world didn't work that easily. Life hadn't given them many opportunities, and every failed attempt weighed heavier on their shoulders. Still, he couldn't deny that the idea made sense. In such a vast world, in a city so indifferent, maybe technology could be their only way to make some noise, to be seen. "All right," he finally said. "We'll do it, but it won't be easy." The following days turned into an incessant cycle of work. While the city moved on around them, Lucas and Samuel immersed themselves in developing the software. They spent hours coding, testing, and looking for ways to improve their algorithm. They wanted to create something unique, something that not only recognized faces, but could cross-reference public and private databases, analyze minute details, and provide leads on missing persons. But the lack of resources became an immediate problem. Their old, slow laptop couldn't handle the processing power the program required. Each day they faced technical issues that seemed impossible to solve. The money was also starting to run out. With every failure in the code, Samuel felt they were getting closer to failure. "This isn't going to work if we don't get more processing power," Samuel said one night, visibly frustrated. "I know," Lucas admitted, "but we can't stop now. We have to find a way." The twins knew they couldn't continue alone. They needed external help, someone who believed in their project and was willing to fund it. However, the search for investors became another obstacle. Most people they approached looked at them with skepticism or simply weren't interested in supporting two inexperienced kids trying to do something so big. Rejection began to wear even on Lucas, whose hope used to be unbreakable. But just when they thought they couldn't go on, Mr. Parker appeared. They met Parker at a small local technology event, a modest conference where entrepreneurs sought new ideas. He was a middle-aged man with dark skin and a penetrating gaze. His presence was magnetic, and from the moment he approached them, Lucas and Samuel knew he was different from the others. "I heard about your project," he said with a smile that radiated confidence. "Facial recognition software, right?" Lucas nodded, surprised that someone showed interest so quickly. "That's right. We're developing something that could help locate missing people, but we're having some technical issues." Parker observed them closely. "That's to be expected with a project of this caliber, but I have to say I like what you're doing. This has potential." His confident tone made Samuel relax a little. During the conversation, Parker not only showed support, but also hinted that he had contacts and resources that could take their software to the next level. "We can work together," he told them. "You have the talent, and I can help you elevate this. But I want you to consider something." The twins exchanged glances. They knew there was always a condition, a price to pay in business. "This type of software," Parker continued, his tone becoming more serious, "has great potential, not only to help find missing people. There are many organizations interested in this kind of technology, from security agencies to governments. We could create something very lucrative if you decide to expand the project." Samuel felt a tension inside him. The vision he and Lucas had was clear: to help people, especially those who, like them, had been abandoned or separated from their families. However, Parker's words hinted that the project could become something more commercial, perhaps compromising their ethical principles. Lucas, always the optimist, seemed willing to consider the offer. He knew they needed funding. Without someone like Parker, they would never fully develop the software. "We'll think about it," Samuel said, trying to buy time. Parker nodded with a shrewd smile. "Don't rush. But remember, time is valuable, and if it's not you, Someone else will make this advancement." When Parker left, the twins were silent. Lucas, as always, saw the opportunity. Samuel, on the other hand, couldn't shake his distrust. He knew that accepting Parker's help could speed up their project, but he also feared losing control over what they had created. He feared that in their eagerness to find their mother, they might compromise everything they believed in. "What do you think?" Lucas asked eagerly. "I don't know," Samuel replied honestly. "Something about this doesn't sit right with me. I don't want this to become something we can't control." Lucas sighed. He knew Samuel was right, but they couldn't keep waiting indefinitely. The city continued to move forward, indifferent to their struggles, and time wasn't on their side. The day of the software presentation had arrived. After weeks of tireless effort, Lucas and Samuel were finally ready to showcase their project to the public. The small conference room was filled with investors and business people, all eager to see the potential of the software the twins had developed. However, among them all, Mr. Parker, sitting in the front row, seemed the most attentive. His eyes were fixed on every movement of the brothers, especially Samuel. Over the weeks, Parker had proven to be a crucial support for the project. He had offered advice, contacts, and even a potential investment, but Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more in the way Parker looked at him. It was a gaze that seemed to go beyond mere interest in the software, as if he were searching for something deeper, something Samuel didn't quite understand. The presentation began. Lucas, always the more extroverted one, took charge of speaking to the audience, explaining the functionalities of the facial recognition software they had developed. Samuel, more reserved, handled the technical demonstrations. Despite his nerves, everything went well. The software impressed the attendees, who were amazed by its ability to track missing persons and analyze vast databases in record time. However, while Samuel focused on the work, he could feel Parker's gaze fixed on him, more intense than ever. When the presentation ended and most attendees began to leave, Parker approached them. His expression was serious, but there was also a shadow of something he hadn't shown before. "Great job, guys," he said with a smile. "This project has a lot of potential. I'm sure you're going to achieve great things with it." Lucas thanked him enthusiastically, excited about the possibility of Parker investing in their project. But before he could continue the conversation, Parker directed his attention straight to Samuel. His gaze locked on him in a way that made Samuel feel uncomfortable. "Samuel, can we talk for a moment alone?" Parker asked, gesturing to a more secluded corner of the room. Samuel hesitated for a second, but nodded and followed him. He knew something important was about to happen, and the way Parker had been looking at him throughout the event only confirmed his suspicions. Once they were at a distance from the others, Parker began to speak, his voice lower, almost as if he feared being overheard. "I've been watching you since we met, Samuel, and I can't help but notice something familiar about you." Samuel looked at him with a furrowed brow, not understanding what he meant. "Familiar? What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep calm. Parker paused, as if carefully choosing his words. There was something in his expression that indicated what he was about to say wasn't easy for him. "Many years ago, I had a romance with a woman. She was white and married. Our relationship was brief, but intense. Shortly after we separated, I found out she was pregnant. I always suspected that child was mine, but she never admitted it." Parker's words hung in the air. Samuel felt his stomach tighten. He couldn't comprehend where this conversation was heading, but a feeling of discomfort began to grow within him. The child she had was born white, like his mother and her husband. She assured me he wasn't mine, but I could never shake the thought that she might have lied. And since the first time I saw you, I haven't been able to ignore how much you resemble me at your age. Parker looked at him intently. "I'm not saying you are that child, Samuel, but I can't overlook the similarities." Samuel felt the ground beneath him become unstable. Could it be that Parker was suggesting he might be his father? The idea was absurd, yet at the same time, he couldn't ignore the intensity in Parker's eyes, the certainty in his voice. "Are you saying you think I'm your son?" Samuel asked, his voice nearly breaking. Parker shook his head, softening his tone. "No, I'm not claiming anything. I can't know for sure, but the coincidences are too many to ignore." I just want you to know that if you decide to investigate this possibility, I'm willing to help you. Not just with the project, but with anything you need to uncover the truth about your mother and your origins." Samuel remained silent. Everything Parker had just said had taken him by surprise. Throughout his life, he had assumed he would never know the truth about his biological parents, that it would always be a mystery. But now, this man, who had been a stranger until recently, was suggesting that he might be closer to that truth than he had ever imagined. "I don't know what to say," Samuel admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Parker nodded with an understanding expression. "You don't have to say anything right now, just think about it. I'm here to help you, whatever path you decide to take." With that, Parker gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder and walked away, leaving Samuel alone with his thoughts. Lucas, who had been watching from a distance, quickly approached. "What did he say?" he asked, clearly worried by the look of confusion on his brother's face. Samuel hesitated for a moment before responding. He thinks he might be our father." Lucas looked at him in disbelief. "What? How is that possible?" Samuel shook his head, trying to organize his thoughts. "I don't know, Lucas. He says he had a romance with a white woman who was married, and she had a child shortly after but she told him the child wasn't his because he was born white. Still, he believes it could have been a lie." Lucas processed the information in silence, absorbing what his brother had just told him. "So, what do we do now?" he finally asked. Samuel shrugged. Everything he knew felt suddenly uncertain. They had come to the city seeking answers about their mother, but now it seemed that their father's past was also shrouded in an unexpected mystery. "I don't know," Samuel said, his voice reflecting the confusion he felt. "But I think we need to find out." Lucas and Samuel were sitting in front of the screen, watching the result of days of hard work. The facial recognition software, the same one they had created to find missing persons, had done its job. They had found a woman who matched the image they had of their mother. The coincidences were too many to ignore, and the address where she lived wasn't far away. But the excitement they initially felt had transformed into a nearly palpable tension. "It's her," Lucas said quietly, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. Samuel nodded, but said nothing. He knew the moment they had been waiting for had arrived, but now that it was here, the fear of what they might discover consumed him. Were they really prepared to face the truth about their mother? They both knew they couldn't wait any longer. With the address in their hands, they walked through the city streets, a heavy feeling hanging in the air. The city, with its bright lights and bustling noise, seemed indifferent to the emotional storm raging within them. When they arrived at the building, they were confronted with a harsh reality. The place was in disrepair, neglected, a reflection of a life marked by precariousness. Skylar, the woman they believed to be their mother, lived in one of those run-down apartments, a dark and gloomy space that contrasted sharply with the hopes Lucas had held on to for so many years. They knocked softly on the door, and when it opened, a woman with a weary face and dull eyes looked at them from the threshold. She was not the loving mother Lucas had dreamed of for so long, nor the figure Samuel had learned to reject in his mind. She was simply a broken woman, worn down by a life that had not been kind to her. "Who are you?" Skylar asked, her voice laced with distrust as her eyes traveled from one twin to the other. Lucas stepped forward, unsure but resolute. "We're Lucas and Samuel," he said, his voice trembling. "We believe you're our mother." Skylar took a step back, startled. A torrent of emotions flooded her eyes, but her expression quickly hardened. "No, you're mistaken. I don't know who you are. I'm not your mother," she said coldly, slamming the door shut as if she could push away the pain those two young men represented. Lucas knocked on the door again, this time with more force. "Please," he pleaded, "we just want to talk. We know it's you." From the other side of the door, Skylar fell silent. She couldn't move. Her mind betrayed her, reliving memories she had buried deeply, memories that tormented her every night. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door slowly creaked open. Skylar looked at them again, but this time tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracked with guilt. "I'm so sorry. Lucas and Samuel stepped into the small apartment, which had barely any furniture and was cluttered with old boxes. The atmosphere was as dark and oppressive as the emotions swirling in the room. Skylar sank into an old chair, while Lucas and Samuel settled in front of her, unsure of where to start. "Why did you abandon us?" Samuel asked, his tone harsh and laden with resentment. Skylar looked up, struggling to find the words. Her face was marked by years of unexpressed suffering and pain. "You have no idea how hard it was," she finally said, her voice trembling. "I thought I'd never see you again. I never wanted this to happen, but I didn't know what else to do." Lucas, always more inclined to forgive, spoke softly. "What happened?" Skylar sighed, as if releasing a burden she had carried for too long. "I married young. Everything was perfect at first. I had a quiet, secure life. But I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I got involved with a black man. It was a brief affair, a slip that should have never happened. Soon after, I found out I was pregnant. At first, I thought I was only having one baby, but then I discovered it was twins." Skylar closed her eyes for a moment, recalling those days with evident pain. "When you were born, one of you was white, like me, like my husband," she said, looking at Lucas. "But the other—" She paused, her gaze landing on Samuel, her eyes filled with sadness. "You were black, Samuel, and everything changed in that moment." Samuel stared at her in silence, unsure how to react to the revelation. "I tried to hide it. I told everyone I had only one child. But my husband, he knew the truth. He knew I had cheated on him. We started fighting constantly, until one day he left me alone. I was left with no one, no family, no friends. Everyone turned their backs on me." "So you decided to abandon us?" Samuel asked, his voice thick with bitterness. Skylar nodded, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't bear the guilt, the rejection. I thought you would be better off without me. But that doesn't mean I didn't love you. I've always thought about you, and the pain of leaving you behind has never gone away." Lucas, moved by her confession, leaned in a little closer. "Why didn't you come back for us?" he asked, his voice filled with sadness. Skylar looked down, unable to meet Lucas's gaze. "I couldn't face what I had done. I convinced myself that you'd be better off if you never knew the truth, if you never knew how much I had failed as a mother." Silence filled the small apartment. Lucas, always more willing to see the good in people, felt the weight of his mother's words. But he also felt the desire to forgive her. Samuel, however, was filled with anger. He couldn't accept what he was hearing so easily. "You left us," he repeated, his fists clenched. "You left us alone in that orphanage while you hid from the world." Skylar covered her face with her hands, unable to contain her sobs. I know. And I'm so sorry. I haven't had a peaceful day since then." Lucas, trying to ease the tension, placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "We can't change the past, Sam." "No, but that doesn't make it any easier to accept," Samuel replied harshly, shaking off his brother's hand. The reunion they had both longed for wasn't what they had envisioned. The wounds were still fresh, and while there was truth, there was also pain. Skylar, burdened by the weight of her guilt, tried to cling to any hope for redemption. "I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me," Skylar said, her voice broken, "but I want to try. I want to be part of your lives, if you'll let me." Lucas looked at her, wrestling with his own feelings. Part of him wanted to embrace her, tell her everything was okay, that they could start anew, but he knew the pain wouldn't just vanish. "We'll help you," he finally said, "but this is going to take time. We can't just forget everything that happened." Samuel remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. He wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, but something within him knew this was just the beginning of a long healing process. The reunion with Skylar had left Lucas and Samuel drowning in deep emotional confusion. Their mother, the woman who had abandoned them, had revealed painful truths that shaped their lives in ways they were just beginning to understand. Yet the impact of that encounter was far from over. A few days after meeting Skylar, Mr. Parker, ever observant and increasingly involved in the twins' lives, began to notice something that deeply unsettled him. While talking with Lucas and Samuel about the progress of their software project, something about their mother's story resonated uncomfortably in his memory. The mention of the man with whom Skylar had had an affair, along with the details of their relationship, combined with the striking resemblance he saw in Samuel every time he looked at him, led him to a troubling conclusion. He couldn't shake the idea that Skylar, the twins' mother, was the same woman he had been involved with in his youth. One afternoon, Parker approached the twins with an unusual seriousness. "Guys, there's something I need to share with you," Parker began, his voice deep and laden with tension. "I've been thinking about the story your mother told you about her past relationship. I think I might be your father." Lucas and Samuel exchanged glances, stunned by what they had just heard. Samuel, who had always been more cautious and suspicious, furrowed his brow. "What are you saying?" Samuel asked, his tone sharp. "How can you be sure of something like that?" Parker sighed, trying to find the right words. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but there are too many coincidences. Skylar, the relationship we had, the timing of your births. And then there are the similarities I see in you, Samuel. I can't ignore it." Lucas, always more inclined to seek peace amid chaos, intervened. "So, what do you suggest?" he asked, a mix of curiosity and fear in his voice. "I think we should do a DNA test," Parker replied, his voice steady. "It's the only way to know for sure." Silence enveloped the room for a moment. The twins knew that if they agreed to this test, their lives could change in ways none of them had anticipated. Until now, they had believed their mother was solely responsible for their abandonment, but the possibility that Parker, a man they had come to trust, was their biological father complicated everything further. Finally, Samuel spoke, his face hardened by confusion and resentment. "Let's do it. If this is true, I want to know once and for all." The DNA test was conducted quickly, but the wait for the results was tormenting. For days, neither Parker nor the twins could focus on anything else. The software they had worked so hard on took a back seat as doubts about their origins clouded their thoughts. Finally, the day of the results arrived. The three of them gathered in Parker's office, a space that had once been a refuge for work, but now felt like a courtroom. Parker held the envelope with the results in his hands, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened it. The silence was suffocating. Lucas and Samuel stood by, waiting for the words that would change their lives forever. Parker, with a dry throat, read the document carefully before lifting his gaze, his eyes filled with a mix of astonishment and contained emotion. "It's true," he finally said. "I am your father." The air seemed to escape the room in that instant. The revelation hit them with the weight of an unforeseen truth. Lucas and Samuel stood frozen, trying to process what they had just heard. "It can't be," Samuel whispered, shaking his head as his emotions began to spill over. "No, it can't be true." Lucas, on the other hand, remained silent, struggling to hold back tears. Throughout their lives, they had been two orphans, abandoned by a system that never provided clear answers. And now, the man who had been close to them, who had offered his help, turned out to be their biological father. The irony of the situation was heartbreaking. Parker, visibly emotional, stepped forward, trying to connect with his sons. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice breaking. "If I had known, if I had any idea that you were my sons, I would have never let this happen. I would have never allowed you to grow up alone." Samuel looked at him with eyes filled with contained fury. "But you did," he shot back, his voice heavy with resentment. "You left us. Maybe you didn't know, but that doesn't change the fact that we've spent our whole lives without you, without anyone." Parker closed his eyes, swallowing the lump in his throat. He knew he couldn't defend himself against those words. He knew he had failed, even if unintentionally. "You're right," Parker said, his voice barely a whisper. "And I can't change what happened. But now that I know, I want to be part of your lives. I want to do the right thing, if you'll allow me." Lucas, moved by Parker's words, intervened before Samuel could say anything more. "This is too much to process," he admitted, looking at Parker with a mix of sadness and hope. "We don't know what to do with all this information, but we don't want to make hasty decisions." Samuel, still unable to contain his anger, stood up abruptly. "I already know what to do," he said harshly. "This doesn't change anything for me. You can't just show up out of nowhere and pretend everything will be fine." With those words, Samuel stormed out of the office, leaving Lucas and Parker in tense silence. Lucas looked at his father, trying to find the right words to ease the tension, but everything he could say felt insufficient. "Give him time," he finally told Parker. "Samuel has been through a lot. He needs time to process this." Parker nodded, though the pain on his face was evident. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, whatever you decide." Lucas lingered in the office a moment longer, trying to reconcile all the pieces of his life that were now scattered before him. Everything he thought he knew about his past, about his origins, had changed in just a few days. The truth had come to light, but that very truth had left a deep mark on his relationship with Samuel and with his newfound father. As he left the office and headed to find his brother, Lucas realized that the search for the truth was not over. While they now knew who their father was, the choices and secrets of the past continued to influence every step they took. After the devastating revelation that Mr. Parker was their biological father, Lucas and Samuel's lives had plunged into a mix of uncertainty and tension. The reunion with Skylar had been difficult, but the news that Parker was their father complicated everything. Samuel was still grappling with intense anger, unable to process everything that was happening, while Lucas tried to keep calm and find some way to reconcile with the reality. Meanwhile, Parker was determined not to lose the twins. He knew he had come into their lives too late, but he didn't want to be sidelined. It was then that, after several conversations with Lucas and Samuel, Parker decided to take an important step. He invited them to meet his family. Parker's family was large, a branch that the twins had never known or even imagined. Until that moment, Lucas and Samuel had only had Skylar and each other as family. Now suddenly, they found themselves facing the possibility of becoming part of something much bigger, something that scared them as much as it intrigued them. On the day of the gathering, Parker took them to his home, a huge house in the suburbs, far from the urban hustle they knew so well. Lucas and Samuel walked toward the door with nervousness. Samuel, in particular, felt a sharp unease in his stomach. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to face Parker's family, but Lucas convinced him it was a necessary step, an opportunity to at least try to understand their place in this new world. The door opened, and a woman with a warm smile and kind eyes greeted them. Parker's wife. She wasn't what Samuel had expected. Despite the uncertainty he felt about how they would be received, Parker's wife embraced them, one by one, without hesitation. "I've heard so much about you," she said gently, her tone sincere and welcoming. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Lucas smiled, relieved by the warm welcome, but Samuel could barely muster a grin. He felt out of place, as if his presence there was a mistake. Inside the house, the atmosphere was sophisticated and filled with family memories that contrasted sharply with the twins' past. Photos of Parker with his wife and children adorned the walls, showcasing a life that seemed perfect from the outside, a life of which the twins were not a part. There was a sense of unreality in the air, as if they were stepping into a world that didn't belong to them. Parker's children watched them from a distance, their eyes filled with suspicion. None of them approached immediately. They seemed bewildered by the arrival of two strangers who, according to what they had been told, were their half-brothers. Although they didn't say it openly, Lucas and Samuel felt the tension in their stares, especially from the younger ones, who could barely hide their discomfort. Parker, aware of the unease hanging in the air, tried to ease the situation. "This is an opportunity for us to get to know each other," he said as he invited them to sit down. "I know this is new for everyone, but I hope we can find a way to become a family, even if it takes time." Lucas, always the peacemaker, nodded, grateful for his father's effort. Samuel, however, remained silent, his distrust of Parker still fresh in his mind. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to have to earn a place in a family that he wasn't even sure would accept him. Dinner was awkward. Although Parker's wife did her best to make the twins feel welcome, the atmosphere remained tense. One of the children, a young man named Logan, could no longer contain himself and finally spoke. "So, how exactly did you two just show up out of nowhere?" he asked, his tone dry and straightforward. Lucas tried to respond patiently. "It's complicated. We're just beginning to figure out the whole story ourselves." But Samuel couldn't help feeling that the question was loaded with judgment, as if they didn't have the right to be there. "Do you have a problem with that?" Samuel asked, his tone sharper than necessary. Logan raised an eyebrow at him, but before the conversation could escalate, Parker's wife quickly intervened. "We're all trying to adjust to this new situation," she said, calm but firm. "This is a challenging time for everyone, but I hope we can give each other the time and space to understand one another better." Dinner continued, but the atmosphere remained charged. The twins felt like outsiders in a home that, despite being their family, did not immediately offer them refuge. As the hours passed, Samuel realized he was not only struggling with resentment toward Parker, but also with the need to be accepted by this new family that, at first glance, seemed to lead a perfect life. After dinner, Parker took Lucas and Samuel to his study. He sat in front of them with a serious expression, but his eyes revealed vulnerability. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. "I know this isn't easy for you," he began. "It isn't easy for me either. But I want you to know that I deeply regret not being there when you needed me most. If I had known the truth before, if I had known that you were my sons—" "But you didn't know," Samuel interrupted, his tone harsh. "You didn't know, and that doesn't change the fact that we grew up alone. While you were here with your perfect family—" Parker lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of Samuel's words. "I know," he said softly, "and I'm sorry, but I want to try to make amends for whatever I can, even though I know it will never be enough." Lucas, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "We don't expect everything to be resolved right away," he said calmly. "We understand this is complicated. We just want a chance to understand it all." At that moment, the study door opened, and Skylar appeared in the doorway. Parker had agreed to meet with her, and although both knew that the past couldn't be changed, it was necessary for them to face their mistakes together. Skylar entered slowly, her eyes meeting Parker's for the first time in years. The tension was palpable, but there was also a shared recognition of what they had lost and what they were now trying to regain. "Parker," Skylar began, her voice filled with repressed emotions. "I didn't expect all of this to happen, but now that we're here, I'm sorry for what happened in the past." Parker nodded, his expression serious but understanding. "I'm sorry too, Skylar. We did the best we could with what we had, but clearly it wasn't enough. Now, all I want is to make sure that these kids, our sons, have a chance to be part of something better." The twins watched their parents, feeling how the past and present intertwined before them. There were open wounds, scars that wouldn't heal soon, but maybe, just maybe, there was a small hope for redemption and reconciliation. Yet, even though some members of Parker's family had welcomed them with open arms, others, like Logan, continued to watch them with suspicion. Lucas and Samuel knew that their place in this family wasn't guaranteed. They would have to earn that space, both within the household and within themselves. And while Samuel wrestled with his feelings of rejection, Lucas, as always, tried to keep hope alive that, with time, the wounds might heal. Overcoming familial barriers had been one of the toughest challenges Lucas and Samuel faced in their lives. Slowly but surely, they managed to carve out a place in Mr. Parker's family, although the relationship was still far from perfect. Parker's wife, Brownie's Claire, had accepted them warmly, and while some of the businessman's children still regarded them with suspicion, the initial tension began to fade. However, the twins knew that what would truly define them was not their place in that family, but the success of their project. They had spent months perfecting their software, dedicating long hours to enhancing its functionality, broadening its reach, and making it more precise. The opportunity that presented itself was unique, an international tech event sponsored by Parker himself, where they would have the chance to showcase their creation before an audience of entrepreneurs, investors, and innovators from around the globe. On the day of the event, Lucas and Samuel nervously prepared backstage. They knew this was not just another presentation, it was the culmination of everything they had built, not only as self-taught programmers, but also as individuals who had found in their technology a way to rebuild their lives. "We've got everything under control," Lucas said, trying to instill some confidence in his brother as they reviewed the slides. Samuel nodded, though the weight of the moment was evident in his eyes. They were not only about to present their software, but also their story. It was as much an emotional challenge as a professional one. They knew they would recount their journey, from being abandoned in an orphanage to discovering their mother and their connection with Parker. And they understood that while their software was developed with the intention of helping people find their loved ones, it could also face tough questions about ethics and privacy. The event was packed with tech experts, influential figures, and journalists. When it was time for their presentation, Lucas and Samuel stepped onto the stage. The lights shone brightly, and the media cameras aimed at them, capturing every detail of their entrance. Lucas, always more comfortable in public situations, began to speak calmly. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucas, and this is my brother Samuel. We are here today to present a technology that not only changed our lives, but that we believe can change the way people reconnect with their loved ones. Our facial recognition software has been designed to help locate missing persons, utilizing public and private databases, in the hope of providing answers to those, like us, who have spent too long searching for their loved ones." Samuel, more reserved, took over. "This technology is not just a project, it is part of our story. We grew up in an orphanage, not knowing who our parents were or why we had been abandoned. For years, the uncertainty about our origins was a burden we carried every day. And it was thanks to this software that we were able to locate our mother and discover a part of ourselves that we had lost. This tool has not only given us answers, but can also offer them to many others." The audience, captivated by the sincerity of their story, listened in silence. The slides displayed the technical features of the software, success stories they had already achieved, and the potential impact it could generate in the world. But just when it seemed everything was going according to plan, a man stood up from the back of the room. It was someone they recognized from previous conferences, Vincent Marlowe, an influential tech competitor who ran a controversial artificial intelligence company. "Your story is certainly moving," Marlowe began, his tone cold and calculating, "but I must question the viability and, above all, the ethics of your software. Do you really expect us to believe that tracking faces and cross-referencing databases does not pose a danger to privacy? Are you not creating, more with good intentions or not, a tool that could be misused by governments or companies to surveil and control people?" The air in the room became tense. Some in the audience murmured among themselves, and the cameras turned to the twins, waiting for a response. Samuel felt the urge to respond harshly, but he knew he couldn't let his emotions take over. Lucas gestured to him, suggesting he take the reins of the situation. Samuel took a deep breath and approached the microphone. "Thank you for your question, Mr. Marlowe. We have also considered those concerns. Privacy is a delicate issue, and it is something we have taken into account from the very beginning. Our software is designed to be used for humanitarian purposes, not for surveillance. Furthermore, we have implemented strict ethical controls and access limitations that restrict its use to certified organizations dedicated to locating missing persons. We know that any technology has the potential to be misused, but it is our responsibility to ensure that it is employed with the right principles and in the appropriate contexts." Lucas, seeing the positive reaction from the audience to Samuel's response, stepped in to strengthen the point. It's true that any innovation can raise questions about its impact on society, and those questions are necessary. But the purpose of our technology is to help people who, like us, have lost everything. We focus on the good we can achieve, and we work every day to ensure that that good prevails." Marlowe seemed ready to respond, but before he could speak, someone from the audience stood up. "I'm Sarah Reed, a representative from an international missing persons organization," she said, directing her attention to the twins. "We have tested your software in our operations, and I want to say that thanks to your work, we have reunited several families that had been searching for answers for years. On behalf of everyone who has benefited, I thank you and urge you to keep going." The audience erupted into applause. Lucas and Samuel exchanged relieved glances. They knew they had gained a key ally in that room, and more importantly, they had demonstrated that their work had a positive and real impact. Marlowe, visibly annoyed, returned to his seat, unable to counter Samuel's response and the support from someone with authority in the field. As the applause continued, Lucas and Samuel thanked the audience and concluded their presentation. As they stepped off the stage, the brothers felt a mix of exhaustion and pride. They had faced one of the toughest challenges of their lives, not only presenting their software to an international audience, but also defending its value against a powerful competitor. "We did it, Sam," Lucas said, giving his brother a pat on the back. Samuel nodded but couldn't help but smile, something that was rare for him. "Yes, we did. But this is just the beginning." Both knew that the real fight for success was far from over, but at that moment they had taken a crucial step. They had not only won the admiration of the audience, but also reaffirmed their purpose to help others find the answers they had been searching for themselves for so long. Over time, the success of Lucas and Samuel's software transformed not only the tech world, but also their lives. What had started as a tool for personal answers had now become a revolution in the field of finding missing persons. The brothers, now known as leaders in the tech industry, had solidified their company, and meanwhile, with the support of Mr. Parker, achieved a financial stability they had never imagined. But beyond the numbers and business achievements, their true victory was personal. After years of uncertainty, rejection, and abandonment, Lucas and Samuel had found something far more valuable than financial success: a sense of belonging and peace. The first step in that journey toward reconciliation was to lift their mother, Skylar, out of poverty. After reuniting with her and learning the reasons behind her abandonment, the twins decided to help her rebuild her life. Despite the deep wounds of the past, both Lucas and Samuel understood that Skylar's pain was also their own. No one could change what had happened, but there was room for redemption. The house where Skylar had lived for years was left behind. Lucas and Samuel moved her into a modest but cozy home where she could start anew. Although Skylar was initially reluctant to accept her son's help, the time and love they offered eventually melted the barriers she had built due to guilt. "I never imagined you would forgive me," Skylar said one day, sitting in the garden of her new home while looking at her sons. "But I'm grateful for this second chance." Lucas, always more open to forgiveness, smiled and took his mother's hand. "We needed it too, Mom. There's no past without scars, but here we are, building something new." Samuel, who still carried deeper emotional scars, nodded in silence. The path to forgiveness had been long for him, but the love of his family, the hard work, and the answers he had found had helped him discover something he never thought possible: peace with himself. In addition to caring for their mother, the twins continued to grow professionally. Their software not only expanded internationally, but they also began collaborating with charities and NGOs, seeking ways to use technology to help vulnerable communities. They had learned that their tool was not just a technical achievement, but an opportunity to change lives in meaningful ways. Mr. Parker, now fully integrated into their lives, watched with pride as his sons forged their path. Although his relationship with Samuel was still complex and marked by lost time, they both worked daily to build something new. The family ties, though fragile, were strengthening. But the real change did not lie in wealth or professional success. The true triumph for Lucas and Samuel had been finding their identity and accepting all the pieces of their past. For years, they had felt like they didn't belong anywhere, that their origin marked them in an irreversible way. But as they grew as individuals, they realized that the past does not define who you are, but how you choose to face it. One afternoon, after a work meeting, the twins found themselves sitting on the office terrace, gazing at the horizon. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in warm colors. "Who would have thought we'd be here?" Lucas said, breaking the silence. Samuel let out a small laugh, something that was uncommon for him. "Definitely not me. If you had told me this years ago, I would have called you crazy." Lucas smiled and looked at his brother. "It's funny how everything has changed. Before, we just wanted to find answers about our past. Now, it seems those answers have given us so much more than we imagined." Samuel looked at him, reflective. Although he had always been the tougher of the two, he couldn't deny that his life had taken an unexpected turn. "You're right," Samuel admitted. "We found much more than just answers. We found Mom, Parker, we found ourselves. I never thought I'd say this, but the technology we created not only helped us move forward professionally, it gave us a fresh start." Lucas nodded, feeling the same peace as his brother. "Technology is powerful, Sam, but not just for what it can do in terms of innovation. It has allowed us to heal, reconnect with the past, and build a future we never thought possible." Samuel looked at him, with a glimmer in his eyes that was rarely seen. "And the best part is, we're just getting started. There's so much more to do." They both sat in silence for a moment, enjoying the sunset and the calm they finally felt inside. They had come a long way since their days in the orphanage, from unanswered questions and nights of uncertainty. Now, with the fortune they had generated and the family bonds restored, Lucas and Samuel had not only triumphed in the tech world, but also in the most important struggle of all, finding a home and their own identity. The chapter of their lives that had once been filled with pain and rejection was closing with an unexpected but deeply satisfying conclusion. Now, with their mother safe, their family rebuilt, and a renewed sense of who they were, the brothers were ready to move forward, knowing that, for the first time in a long while, they belonged somewhere. And so, as the sun disappeared on the horizon, Lucas and Samuel stood up, ready to face the future. The road had been long and painful, but now they could finally walk it with the certainty that they had found the peace they had sought for so long. Dear friends, we hope you enjoyed this story as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to do so. Your subscription means the world to us and helps us keep sharing amazing and heartfelt stories with you. Your feedback is incredibly important to us. Did you like the story? Please leave a comment and let us know what you think. It helps us continue creating stories that resonate and inspire. Right now, a playlist of more stories from our channel is appearing on your screen. We invite you to explore and enjoy these other captivating tales. Thank you for being part of our journey. We look forward to sharing more stories with you soon. Until next time.